November 18, 1978. A remote clearing in the Guyanese jungle. A man with a microphone is giving instructions as children begin to die. Not in chaos, not in panic. In lines. Mothers are calmly injecting poison into their babies' mouths. Fathers are holding them down. A vat of grape-flavored drink sits in the center of the camp, laced with cyanide, sedatives, and tranquilizers. Within 45 minutes, over 900 people will be dead. But here's what most people never hear. Many of them didn't scream. Many of them didn't run. Some even thanked him before they died. And the man behind it all, Jim Jones, didn't force them at gunpoint. He convinced them. He trained them. He rewired their minds so completely that when death came, it felt like the only logical choice left. A survivor later testified, "It didn't feel like dying. It felt like obedience." How do you convince nearly 1,000 people to willingly participate in their own deaths? And more importantly, could it happen again? Jim Jones was not born a monster. He was born May 13, 1931, in Crete, Indiana, a small, economically devastated town during the Great Depression. Poverty wasn't just present. It defined everything. His father was a disabled veteran who withdrew emotionally. His mother was ambitious but distant. There was no emotional stability in that house. And in that vacuum, something began to form. From an early age, Jones showed an unusual fixation, not just on religion but on authority. He didn't play like other children. He observed. He imitated. He experimented with control. He wasn't interested in toys. He was interested in influence. He would gather neighborhood children and force them to sit through sermons he delivered. He demanded silence, tension, obedience, and if they didn't comply, he would punish them, exclude them, manipulate them. Even as a child, he understood something most adults never consciously realize. People want to belong, and that desire can be controlled. At age 10, neighbors recalled a disturbing incident. Jones killed a cat, then staged a full funeral for it, not as a joke, as a ritual. He delivered a sermon over the body, forcing other children to attend. This wasn't just fascination with death. It was rehearsal. By adolescence, Jones had developed a reputation. Intense, isolated, persuasive. He wasn't just learning information. He was learning people. But he also had something else. Something critical. Charisma. Not the loud, flamboyant kind. Quieter, more dangerous version. He knew how to look at people. How to mirror them. How to make them feel seen. Understood. And by 1955, he found the perfect system to scale that ability, religion. The People's Temple looked like a typical church. Emotional sermons, faith healing, strong community ties. But Jones was strategic. He began preaching integration, actively recruiting black members. This was radical. It gave him immediate attention. To many, he looked like a progressive leader, a man ahead of his time. And for many families, the People's Temple offered something powerful. Safety, equality, belonging. By the 60s, the temple was growing. Jones performed faith healings, curing illnesses, exposing secrets. But later investigations revealed the truth. These healings were staged, planted audience members, pre-collected information. It was performance. But to his followers, it felt real. And that blurred line between reality and illusion became his most powerful tool. Once someone believes you can do the impossible, they stop questioning what is possible. He shifted his messaging. Less Christianity, more ideology. He blended religion with socialism and apocalyptic warnings. But there was one consistent theme beneath it all: dependence. He positioned the outside world as corrupt, dangerous, doomed, and the temple as the only safe place left. I am the only one who can lead you, the only one who can save you. If you leave here, you will die out there. That wasn't a metaphor. It was instruction. By the mid-1960s, he moved to California. This move wasn't just geographic. It was strategic. He built relationships with politicians, organized voters, provided social services. On the surface, it looked like a positive movement, but inside, the structure was tightening. Loyalty was no longer encouraged. It was enforced. Long meetings, public humiliation, admitting to affairs, theft, doubts. This wasn't about accountability. It was about leverage. Former members testified that Jones kept files, detailed records of vulnerabilities used against them. He didn't just control belief. He controlled behavior. He dictated where they lived. He monitored relationships. He separated families. At one point, he claimed he was the only true heterosexual, and that all other relationships were meaningless compared to loyalty to him. Sounds absurd, but inside the system it made sense, because the system had replaced reality. By the 1970s, cracks appeared. Defectors spoke out. Journalists investigated. Jones was losing the narrative. In 1977, as a major exposé was about to be published, Jones made a sudden decision. He fled the United States. With over 900 followers, he called it Jonestown. He told them it would be a paradise, a socialist utopia, and many believed him. But what they found when they arrived was isolation, exhaustion, control. One early arrival managed to send a letter back. "This isn't a community. It's a cage. Please help us get out." Once they were inside, surrounded by jungle and a leader who controlled every aspect of their reality, leaving wasn't just difficult. It was impossible. Jonestown was isolated by design, not just geographically, psychologically. It sat deep in the Guyanese jungle, approximately 150 miles northwest of Georgetown, the capital of Guyana. The land itself was dense, humid, and unforgiving, thick rainforests stretching endlessly in every direction. The air was heavy, saturated with moisture, making even basic movement exhausting. Mosquitoes carried disease. The ground turned to mud after rain. Visibility dropped quickly once you stepped beyond the cleared settlement. The nearest road was not a real escape route. It was a rough, partially carved track that became nearly unusable during storms. The only reliable connection to the outside world was a small airstrip, and access to it was controlled. There was no easy exit, and that wasn't accidental. Jim Jones chose Guyana deliberately after scouting multiple locations. It was politically distant from the United States, had a government that was open to foreign agricultural projects, and most importantly, it allowed him to operate without constant oversight. But geography was only one layer. The real isolation was constructed inside the minds of the people who lived there. There were armed guards, men assigned to perimeter patrols, some loyal, some fearful, some simply trapped within the same system they were enforcing. They walked the outer boundaries of the settlement, watching for movement, not just from outside threats, but from anyone inside who might attempt to leave. Watchtowers were built, simple structures, but symbolic, because they didn't just provide visibility. They reinforced a message: you are always being watched. And beyond that, miles of wilderness that most residents were not prepared to survive in. Many were elderly. Many had spent their lives in cities. Few had the skills to navigate dense jungle terrain without guidance, supplies, or maps. This wasn't just distance. It was psychological imprisonment, because escape requires belief, and Jonestown removed that belief. This wasn't just a settlement. It was containment. From the moment followers arrived, their reality changed in ways that were immediate and deliberate. Passports were confiscated, not for safekeeping, removed, controlled, a symbolic and practical severing from the outside world. Money was surrendered. In many cases, followers had already signed over assets, homes, savings, pensions, to the People's Temple before arriving. There was no financial independence left. Personal belongings were reduced. Clothing became communal. Living spaces were shared. Privacy dissolved. What remained was the group, the collective, and within that collective, individual identity began to erode. Work became the central structure of daily life. 10 to 12 hours per day, sometimes longer. Agricultural labor, clearing land, planting crops, repairing buildings, cooking, cleaning, childcare. The work was physically demanding, the heat constant, the humidity oppressive. The body never fully recovered, and the land itself resisted them. Soil conditions were poor, crops failed, harvests were inconsistent, food shortages became routine, meals were minimal, rice, beans, occasional vegetables, protein was rare, eggs when available, meat almost never, malnutrition became visible, children with distended stomachs, thin limbs, low energy. Adults experienced it too, but adults were expected to endure. Complaints were seen as weakness or disloyalty. Sleep was restricted, not always by rule, but by environment, because even at night, there was no silence. And exhaustion is not accidental in systems like this. It is engineered, because exhaustion weakens resistance. It slows thought. It reduces the ability to question. It makes obedience feel easier than thinking. And above everything, there was the voice. Speakers were installed throughout Jonestown, because escape requires belief, and Jonestown removed that belief. This wasn't just a settlement, it was containment. From the moment followers arrived, their reality changed in ways that were immediate and deliberate. Passports were confiscated, not for safekeeping, removed, controlled, a symbolic and practical severing from the outside world. Money was surrendered. In many cases, followers had already signed over assets, homes, savings, pensions, to the People's Temple before arriving. There was no financial independence left. Personal belongings were reduced. Clothing became communal. Living spaces were shared. Privacy dissolved. What remained was the group, the collective, and within that collective, individual identity began to erode. Work became the central structure of daily life. 10 to 12 hours per day, sometimes longer. Agricultural labor, clearing land, planting crops, repairing buildings, cooking, cleaning, childcare. The work was physically demanding, the heat constant, the humidity oppressive. The body never fully recovered, and the land itself resisted them. Soil conditions were poor, crops failed, harvests were inconsistent, food shortages became routine, meals were minimal, rice, beans, occasional vegetables, protein was rare, eggs when available, meat almost never, malnutrition became visible, children with distended stomachs, thin limbs, low energy. Adults experienced it too, but adults were expected to endure. Complaints were seen as weakness or disloyalty. Sleep was restricted, not always by rule, but by environment, because even at night, there was no silence. And exhaustion is not accidental in systems like this. It is engineered, because exhaustion weakens resistance. It slows thought. It reduces the ability to question. It makes obedience feel easier than thinking. And above everything, there was the voice. Speakers were installed throughout Jonestown. Jones would speak. He would announce an imminent threat, an attack, an invasion. The source varied. The message did not. There was only one option: death as protest, death as resistance, death as control. Cups were distributed, a dark liquid, bitter-smelling, and people were told to drink. And they did. Survivors later confirmed that in many of these drills, the liquid contained no poison. But the participants didn't know that. They believed they were dying. They believed they were sacrificing themselves. And that belief was the mechanism. This was conditioning, not symbolic, neurological. Each repetition rewired response. Each act lowered resistance. The brain adapted. What was once terrifying became familiar. What was familiar became acceptable. And what was repeated became reality. At first, there was hesitation, fear, confusion. But over time, those reactions faded. Because the brain cannot remain in a constant state of alarm. It adjusts. It normalizes. Jones reinforced this relentlessly. Through language, through repetition, through emotional pressure. Death was reframed. not as loss, but as liberation, not as failure, but as victory, a final act of loyalty. And slowly, that idea took hold, because there was no alternative, no outside perspective, no competing narrative, only his. And over time, death stopped feeling like an ending and started feeling like a duty. By late 1978, pressure from the outside world was building. Relatives of People's Temple members had formed a group known as the Concerned Relatives. They had gathered testimonies from defectors, accounts of abuse, coercion, control. They lobbied the U.S. government, demanded investigation, and their voices were growing louder. Journalists began preparing exposés. Stories were forming. The narrative was shifting. And Congressman Leo Ryan made a decision. He would investigate personally. Ryan was not passive. He believed in first-hand observation. He had previously entered prisons undercover to understand conditions. He didn't rely on reports. He verified reality. And so he traveled to Guyana, arriving November 14, 1978, with journalists, its concerned family members. First, Jonestown performed. Smiles, songs, order. Residents spoke positively, praised the community, denied allegations. It looked functional, but performance has limits, and cracks began to appear. On November 17th, during a gathering, a note was passed to NBC reporter Don Harris. Please help us get out of Jonestown. It was small, but decisive, because it confirmed the truth. People were not there by choice. More notes followed. More individuals approached quietly, expressed fear, requested escape. Ryan agreed to take them, and that decision triggered collapse, because control depends on containment, and containment cannot survive exposure. Jones understood immediately. If people left, they would speak. If they spoke, the system would collapse. So he acted. That night, Jones told his inner circle, if they leave, everything ends. This wasn't panic. It was calculation. On November 18th, Ryan and defectors traveled to Port Kaituma airstrip. 2 planes waited, engines running, tension high. Some hesitated. Conditioning doesn't disappear instantly, but they boarded. And then, a vehicle approached, a tractor with a trailer. Inside, armed temple members. They opened fire. No warning. Ryan was shot, killed. 4 others died. Don Harris, Bob Brown, Greg Robinson, Patricia Parks. Others were wounded. Some survived by hiding, some by chance. This was the first assassination of a sitting U.S. congressman in modern history, and it sealed everything. There was no recovery. Authorities would come. The world would know. And Jones knew the system was ending, unless he ended it first. So he initiated the final white night. Back in Jonestown, the call went out. Assembly, Central Pavilion, everyone, hundreds gathered, children, adults, elderly, entire families. And then, Jones spoke. The recording captured everything. His voice calm, controlled. He reframed reality in real time. This was not collapse. This was resistance. Not suicide. Revolution. Christine Miller spoke. I don't think we should die. A rare moment of clarity. But Jones responded instantly. It's too late. Choice removed. The poison was prepared. Cyanide, sedatives, mixed into a grape drink. Children first. Mothers administered it. Infants, toddlers, young children. Some resisted. Some cried. Some didn't understand. Within minutes, convulsions, death. Audio captures both terror and calm. Children crying while adults reassure them, maintaining belief even as reality collapses. Then, the adults. They drank, collapsed. Some resisted. Few escaped, because mentally, escape had already been removed. Jones said, death is just stepping over into another plane. And that belief completed the process. 918 dead, over 300 children, bodies everywhere, still, silent, the largest mass civilian death in modern U.S. history before 2001. Jones, gunshot wound, different end. And when authorities arrived, they found not just death, but a system, built slowly, executed completely, because this wasn't sudden. It was engineered. And that is what makes it terrifying. Not the deaths, but how they became possible. What happened in Jonestown wasn't just tragedy. It was psychology in its most extreme form. Not random, not chaotic, structured, layered, deliberate. At the core of it is a concept known as coercive persuasion, a systematic process used to break down an individual's identity and rebuild it under the control of another authority. This isn't speculation. It has been studied in prisoners of war, totalitarian regimes, and high-control groups. And Jonestown follows the pattern almost exactly. Jim Jones didn't need chains. He didn't need physical force in the beginning. He used something far more effective, gradual control, because the human mind doesn't resist sudden change well, but it adapts to slow change almost effortlessly. It started with love bombing. New members weren't recruited through fear. They were welcomed, embraced, given attention, validation, and a sense of purpose. For many members of the People's Temple, particularly Black Americans in the 1950s and 60s, this wasn't just appealing. It was rare. A racially integrated community, a leader preaching equality, a place where people were seen. He gave them food, housing, community support. People who had been ignored by society were suddenly central to something important, valued, and that emotional impact is powerful. Because humans are wired for connection. Belonging isn't optional. It's a psychological need. And when you find a place that fulfills that need completely, you don't question it. You protect it. Survivors later described their first experiences as overwhelmingly positive. One member said, "It felt like I had finally found a family that would never abandon me." That's the hook. Because once emotional attachment is established, control can begin. Next came isolation. Not immediate, not obvious, gradual. Members were encouraged to spend more time with the temple, less time with outsiders. Family members who questioned Jones were labeled negative influences, dangers, enemies. Eventually, communication with the outside world became limited, then controlled. Then, in Jonestown, almost non-existent, and without external input, perspective collapses, because reality is shaped by comparison. When there is no comparison, whatever you're told becomes truth. Jones became the primary, and eventually the only source of information. News, interpretation, meaning. Without comparison, his reality became the only reality. And when that happens, doubt has nowhere to go. Survivors said they stopped trusting their own thoughts. One described it as your mind second-guessing itself before you even finish a thought. That's the goal. Because once a person no longer trusts their own judgment, they outsource it to the leader. Next, confession and control. Public confession sessions were a regular part of temple life. Members were encouraged and later required to reveal personal secrets, affairs, theft, private doubts, even critical thoughts about Jones. These weren't voluntary in the long term. They were structured, monitored, and once revealed, recorded. This served multiple purposes. Created vulnerability, created dependency, and it created leverage. Because once your deepest secrets are exposed, leaving becomes dangerous. Because now, someone else controls your narrative. Former members later confirmed that Jones kept extensive records, detailed files containing personal confessions, fears, and past actions that could be used to discredit or threaten anyone who attempted to leave. This is a known control mechanism in coercive systems. It's not just about loyalty, it's about risk. Leaving no longer feels like freedom, feels like exposure. Then came fear conditioning. Jones constantly reinforced the idea that the outside world was hostile, dangerous, actively seeking to destroy them. He spoke of government plots, assassination attempts, conspiracies. Even when there was no evidence, repetition made it feel real. And fear changes behavior. When people believe they are under constant threat, they become more obedient, because obedience feels like protection. It's not submission, it's survival. This mirrors findings from the Milgram experiment conducted in 1961, where participants continued to administer what they believed were painful electric shocks to others simply because an authority figure told them to. The majority complied, even when it conflicted with their morals. But Jones didn't stop there. He added something more powerful: rehearsed obedience, the white knight drills, repeated exposure to the act itself, over and over. This is critical, because the first time someone is asked to do something extreme, they resist. But if they are asked repeatedly, in controlled conditions, resistance decreases, the brain adapts, the emotional shock fades, the act becomes familiar, and familiarity reduces fear. By the time the real moment came, it didn't feel new, it didn't feel sudden, felt practiced, expected, even inevitable. And that's how you bypass instinct, because survival instinct relies on shock. Remove the shock, and you weaken the instinct. Then came the final psychological barrier: cognitive dissonance. This is the mental discomfort experienced when a person holds two conflicting beliefs. In Jonestown, that conflict was clear: this is wrong, versus I have given my life to this. People had sacrificed everything: money, homes, family relationships, identity. To admit it was all a lie would mean accepting total loss, and the human brain resists that level of loss. So instead, it resolves the conflict another way: by justifying the system, by reinforcing belief, by going deeper. A survivor later said, admitting he was wrong meant admitting we had wasted our lives. And that was harder than anything he ever asked us to do. And for many, death felt easier than that realization, because death preserved the belief. It avoided the collapse. It allowed the story to remain intact. Jim Jones didn't create blind followers. That's a misunderstanding. Blind followers don't exist at that scale. What he created was a system, a closed loop, where every psychological mechanism reinforced the next. Belonging led to isolation. Isolation led to dependence. Dependence led to obedience. Obedience led to repetition. Repetition led to normalization. Normalization led to inevitability. And inside that system, doubt became impossible, because there was no space for it, no language for it, no alternative to compare it against. Obedience didn't feel like submission, felt like survival. And by the time the final moment came, death didn't feel like a choice. It felt like the only logical conclusion left. If you want to understand the minds behind history's darkest moments, subscribe. We go deeper every week. When the world learned about Jonestown, the reaction was immediate shock. News broke on November 19, 1978. First, the reports were unclear. Conflicting numbers, uncertain details. Some believed it was a small incident, a few deaths, a violent confrontation. But as more information came in, the scale became impossible to ignore. Hundreds dead, then more, then over 900. It didn't fit any familiar category. Not war, not natural disaster, something else, something harder to explain. But alongside the shock, there was confusion, because this wasn't just about what happened. It was about how it happened. How does a community collapse like that? How does a leader gain that level of control? And more importantly, who allowed it? Who missed it? Who ignored it? The bodies were flown back to the United States in stages. Military transport planes carried them from Guyana to Dover Air Force Base in Delaware. The process was slow, complicated, disturbing, because many of the bodies had already begun to decompose in the tropical heat. Identification was difficult. In some cases, families waited days, weeks, sometimes months, for confirmation. Some never received it. Closure didn't come easily, because there was no clean ending, only fragments. More than 400 bodies were initially buried in a mass grave due to the inability to identify them quickly. one of the largest temporary mass burials in modern U.S. history. Investigations began almost immediately. Multiple agencies became involved. The FBI, the State Department, congressional committees. But the investigation faced immediate limitations. Because the central figure, Jim Jones, was dead. Many key members of his inner circle, also dead. Those who carried out orders. Those who enforced discipline. Those who knew the full structure of the system, gone. And without them, reconstructing events became difficult. Records were incomplete. Some documents were recovered in Jonestown. Others had been destroyed. Some were never found. And then there were the tapes. Dozens of audio recordings recovered from the site, including the death tape. They provided insight, but not full clarity, because recordings capture moments, not systems, and some evidence was never fully released. This is where the uncertainty deepens, because beyond the visible tragedy, there were unanswered questions. There were documented connections between Jim Jones and political figures in California. He had access, influence. He mobilized voters, supported campaigns. In return, he gained legitimacy, protection, or at least the appearance of it. There were also reports suggesting that Jones had indirect contact with U.S. intelligence agencies, though no definitive proof has ever been confirmed. But the existence of these claims has fueled speculation for decades. Why was Jonestown allowed to operate with so little oversight? Why were repeated warnings not acted upon more aggressively? Why did it take a congressional visit to trigger intervention? The lack of clear answers created space for suspicion, and suspicion filled the gaps left by missing information. But beyond government questions, there was another issue: accountability. Because while many perpetrators died in Jonestown, not all of them did. Some members of the inner circle were not present during the final events. Some were in Georgetown. Others had assignments outside the main compound. And some survived. These individuals had played roles in maintaining the system, enforcing discipline, carrying out punishments, monitoring members, and yet, many faced limited legal consequences. Some were questioned, some testified, but few were prosecuted in a way that matched the scale of the outcome. One of the most prominent surviving members, Larry Layton, was later convicted for his role in the Port Kaituma airstrip attack, but even his case raised questions about how responsibility was distributed within the group. Because Jonestown blurred the line between victim and participant. Many who enforced rules were also controlled by the same system. Many who obeyed had been conditioned for years. So where does responsibility begin? And where does it end? This is what made the aftermath so difficult. There was no single answer, no clear boundary between those who chose and those who were shaped into choosing. Jonestown became a symbol, a warning, a case study, used in discussions of cult psychology, authoritarian control, and mass persuasion. But it also became something else, a mystery. Because even with all the documentation, all the testimony, all the analysis, there are still unanswered questions about decision-making, about timing, about what could have been prevented and what couldn't. And perhaps the most unsettling part is how it was remembered, or more accurately, how it was reduced. The phrase "drinking the Kool-Aid" entered popular culture, used casually, often jokingly, to describe blind loyalty, unquestioning belief, stripped of its context, detached from its origin. But in Jonestown, it wasn't Kool-Aid. It was Flavor Aid, a cheaper powdered drink mix. And more importantly, it wasn't voluntary in the way the phrase suggests. It was the result of years of psychological conditioning, fear, isolation, control. It was not a moment of foolishness. It was a system reaching its final stage. And behind that phrase are 918 people, over 300 children, families, lives, stories, reduced to a metaphor. And that reduction may be one of the most subtle forms of forgetting. Because when something becomes a joke, it stops feeling real. And when it stops feeling real, it becomes easier to believe it could never happen again. There's a tendency to look at Jonestown and think, that could never happen again, that those people were different, more vulnerable, more naive. But that's not what the evidence shows. Jim Jones didn't recruit weak people. He recruited hopeful people, people looking for purpose, belonging, meaning, and then he reshaped that hope into obedience. The terrifying truth isn't what happened in Jonestown, it's how human it was, because the same psychological mechanisms still exist today. Authority, isolation, fear, belonging, they haven't changed. Only the context has. So the real question isn't, how did they follow him? It's, under the right conditions, how many of us would? If you want to understand the minds behind history's darkest moments, subscribe to Odd Past. We go deeper every week.